Afternoon, folks. We got some more work to do on the Jeep bumper. It's a lot of welding and grinding to do. I'm going to work on it a bit today and figured why not do a bit of stick welding on it. And since I was going to do that, I figured I would talk a little bit about stick welding machines and a little bit of my experience as far as getting into welding and the machines that I've used and what's worked for me. So hopefully I can give a bit of advice just from my own experience to guys who are trying to get into it and maybe not quite sure what to get or what they need. So I'm going to talk a bit about these machines that I have and some that I've started with in the past, and then I'm going to do a bit of welding with all three of these, but we're going to compare them, not so much as far as actual welding, because they're all DC machines. DC welding is, you're not going to see a lot of variance with DC welding a lot of times, but what I really want to compare with these is how they perform on 115 volt. These are all dual voltage machines. They will run on 115 or 230, and I'm going to just plug it into the wall outlet here, and granted this is kind of an older building, so I'm not convinced that it's a good strong 20 amp breaker out, so I'm going to anticipate a little bit of problems with flicking the breaker there, but you always want to use the strongest breaker you can. If you have a 20 amp, that's going to be better than 15 amp, but that's what we're going to be doing today. My first welder I ever got was pretty much an ignorant impulse buy. I hadn't studied really anything about welding, hadn't even watched many videos, and I bought a 90 amp Clark AC stick welder from a guy on Craigslist. Got it for like 80 bucks. And I was all excited to use it, and I, not knowing any better, I go to Home Depot and get some 1/8 inch 6011s and go home all excited to try out my new welder, and it would hardly run it. I'm not convinced that it was actually putting out 90 amps. It was just a very cheap machine. The ground clamp, the electrode holder, all just very chintzy and cheap, and the only way I could actually weld at the machine is if I went down to a 16th inch 6011. So I threw that machine in the trash, and I would suggest staying away from that sort of machine if you're starting to learn how to weld. I know stuff can get expensive, and you don't need to spend a ton of money, but I would definitely stay away from those dirt cheap 90 amp stick welders. They're just going to cause you a headache, and if you actually end up getting into welding, you're going to upgrade from that, because it really limits you in what you can actually weld with that. And when you're just starting to learn how to weld, it's frustrating enough trying to figure out how to strike an arc and keep that arc length and travel along smoothly. So you don't want to add any frustration just to save a little bit of money. Again, you get a decent machine, you'll have it for years. And one of those things, if you actually take up welding, you're going to get more machines, and you're going to throw that damn thing in the trash, or keep it as a conversational piece. But so after that machine, the next one I got was one of the Lincoln Tombstone welders, 225 AC buzz boxes. I got it from a guy at work for about 100 bucks. It was a little beat up, but it worked, and I used that machine for a while. I got a lot of good practice on it, but it never seemed to perform very well, like as it should, as if it was lacking power. And it actually ended up being my fault. To this day, I do not understand. I cannot explain how I did not make this connection. But I was in a barn, I was running it off of a generator, and I cursed that machine for a year or two that it was underpowered and that it wasn't working well, only to realize one day that it calls right on the front, it calls for 50 amps of input. I guess back in the day, 30 years ago, your dryer and stuff would have run off of 50 amps of input, whereas everything today has kind of gone to 30 amps on the 230 volt side. So generator just wasn't putting out enough power, and a lot of people talk about these buzz boxes, and got a call from Hobart. Classes are suspended another month till May 11th as of now. Oh well, what are you gonna do? But anyway, the AC buzz box, it's a rugged machine, it's reliable, but if you're gonna get one of those, I would just suggest that you make sure you're actually going to be able to supply the current for that. I don't know if some of these newer ones run on 30, but if you get one of the older ones, and I'll get to that in a second, if you get one that needs 50 amps, just make sure that you can actually supply 50 amps, because otherwise it'll flick the breaker and it's just going to be underpowered. Again, a lot of frustration. One other thing I didn't really care for with those machines was the amperage increments. There's like 10, 15 amp increments in some places, and you can work around it. If you're just trying to practice, it's not a huge deal. But if you're actually getting into building stuff, you really want to have a little bit more amperage adjustment than that. But kind of just more of an inconvenience more than like a deal breaker. But I think the only way, again, with the caveat that you have the current to supply it, I think the only way that makes sense for one of these buzz boxes is if you get a used one. You get one on Craigslist for $100, $150, because I've seen them in Home Depot, and I just went and checked online. Those AC 225 welders, if you were to buy them new, they're up around $400. And at that point, it's really not worth it for that. There's a lot better options you can get for that money that are inverter based, so they require less power draw. You can get a dual voltage machine that can do a little bit of work off of 115, and you get better control over the amperage. And that leads me to the next stick welding machine that I got. It's this Everlast 140 STI. This is a dual voltage machine, has a max output of 140 amps. It's DC only. It also does lift arc TIG, and that's kind of the reason I actually bought this machine, because it's kind of the cheapest way to get a TIG welding capable machine. But I want to do another video kind of along these same lines as far as TIG welding, so I won't address that for now. But you're going to want to have 230 if you're going to get this machine, because yes, it does run on 115, but if you want to run larger stick electrodes, especially if you want to run 1/8, you're really going to need to use 230. And it does fine on 230 if you have an outlet for that. It'll run a 1/8, 7018, 7014 just fine. The electrode holder was a little bit cheap. I threw that in the trash too, and just got one from Tractor Supply. It works fine. It's a little over $300 I got this machine for. And again, if your alternative is a buzz box, again, it's only going to make sense to get that if you get a used one for $100 and you have the current to supply it. But again, you get 1 amp increment adjustment with this, which is nice. And I was going to get rid of this machine actually after I got this Power MIG, but I decided to hold on to it just because it's so small and slick that I figured I could find a use for it. So if you're getting into stick welding, this could be a good option for you. Again, with this machine, I would prefer to have 230 if you have access to that. It's pretty cheap, it's portable, and 1 amp increments, not a bad choice. This is the next welder that I got, and this is the one that I actually wanted to get, but I got the Everlast just because it was so much cheaper. But the more I started to build stuff, fabricate, and do more auto body, I really wanted to get into MIG, solid wire with gas, because it's really just the way to go with thinner stuff, and for just building stuff, you can't beat MIG. And I had a 115 volt flux core welder at the time, and it's just tough to do good work with that. And if you're learning, it's a little bit frustrating. It's really dirty and smoky, and again, just hard to make it look good. So I picked this machine up, the Lincoln Power MIG 210 MP. It's primarily a MIG welder, dual voltage, 115 and 230, but it also stick welds and does lift arc TIG DC, so no aluminum unless you get the spool gun. But to me, the versatility that is a little bit limited. I knew I wanted to get an AC TIG welder down the road, so I didn't worry about that. But I've been very happy with this machine, and it's a little bit pricey, maybe a little cost prohibitive if you're just getting started. It ran me about $1,400, which is what they're going for online right now. But I picked this up at the local welding supply shop in Rutland at the main Oxy, so I was glad to buy it there, support those guys a bit. And I've been very happy with it. I have run it on 115 volt a lot, and it's pretty respectable, especially with MIG, what it will do on 115. So I like that versatility of the dual voltage and the various processes that this machine does. It's about 40 pounds. It's pretty compact. You can move it around, and it's been great. And if you got the money to spend, I think it's definitely worth it to have that versatility. And if you just want to get a welder just to repair random stuff, then, do whatever you want. Take some of this with a grain of salt. But I'm more directing this towards people who know they want to get into welding and they want to know what's going to work well for them. So if you got the money to spend, I would definitely recommend this machine. Having the ability to stick weld is great for learning. I would argue stick is the best process to learn with, just because you really master a lot of the fundamentals learning how to weld on stick more so than MIG, and TIG is just kind of tough to jump into if you don't have any experience. And also for building and repairs and stuff, you really want to be able to just clamp that ground on there, chuck up a rod, and then lay a nice stick weld in there. It's a very cheap, simple, robust process that you definitely want to have the ability to do if you're doing anything serious with your welders. But this machine has been great, and again, I really only bought this Everlast because I didn't have the cash to spend at this point. But I got my tax returns, got some profit sharing from the factory, and I went and picked this up, and very glad that I did. This is the welder that I bought most recently. It's an AHP Alpha TIG 201 XD AC/DC TIG, 200 amp capacity, or output rather. Has pulse, AC balance, AC frequency, and that's primarily why I bought it. High frequency, you can use a foot pedal, which really takes you to a whole nother level pretty much with TIG. I started getting frustrated with the lift arc trying to learn, but foot pedal's great to have, and I like having these knobs here where I just feel it might last a little bit longer than the more digital setups. That's maybe just a baseless prejudice, but I kind of like just having the adjustments like that. But I've been pretty happy with this machine. Primarily, I got it, of course, for the TIG welding function, which I've used it a lot for. But it's capable of stick welding also on AC or DC, and maybe I'll do a little bit of AC with it just for the hell of it. But I have not done a lot of stick welding with this machine, but the little that I have definitely impressed me. I ran it on 115 volt, which we're going to do later in the video, and it's got quite a lot of output for running on 150. Again, you got to take your breaker into consideration, but I'm pretty impressed with what this machine will put out for being on 115. I got this for about $800, which I think is very fair for the capabilities. It has a few little quirks that I don't like, but for high frequency, for AC/DC, pulse capability, balance and frequency, and the ability to do some good stick welding on 115, I don't think you could beat it for that price. And again, keep in mind, I'm not really trying to plug any of these brands. I'm more just talking about the machines that I have for the purpose of just going over features and capabilities. But what we're going to do next is I'm going to take the bumper out on the porch again. It's, again, 3/16 mild steel. And I'm just going to plug these machines into the wall, 115 volt outlet, and we're going to see what they'll do. I'll see what the max output is that the machine reads for 115 volt, and we'll run some beads with them and see how they do. Going to be trying out the Everlast first out here on the porch. Just trying to block in some of the arc flash. You know, there's a lot of neighbors and stuff around here, just trying to keep everybody as safe as I can, I guess, or not bother them as much. But I'm just plugged right into a wall outlet here, again using that pigtail. So I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to see what's the most we can get out of this on 115. And I'm pretty sure that's it, 80. Yeah, so 80 amps. I got the bumper out here. I got a little piece of 1/4 inch too, a little test plate. I'm probably going to weld on, do some various different rods, you know, 6011, 7018, and try those out. Machines on electrode positive, just to keep it consistent. This is a 332nd 6011, got it maxed at about 80 amps, and it's having a little bit of trouble. I've always run into problems with this particular machine with 6011, not wanting to hold a very good arc. And it's not equipped for 6010, so that's not an option either. Turn up the hot start and arc force a little bit to see if that would help me hold an arc a little better. Seemed to help out slightly, but still not all that great. And here I went down to a 1/16 6011 actually. It's kind of tough to get those thin rods dialed in sometimes. They just heat up so quickly, and it's probably not the best rod for that thickness of metal. Trying a 1/16 7014 right here. Probably could have got that one to run a little better if it was thinner material and I dialed it in a bit more, but didn't really go too well. Do the Lincoln next. 10 gauge size that goes. Has that safety feature, the output's off. So let's see how high we can go. 115 on 115 volt. I'm going to try this one. I'm running 332. I'm going to try that 75 amps. Starting off again with a 332 6011. I originally set it at 75, but ended up turning it to 80. Ran a little better. Definitely a little better than the Everlast. A little bit of a smoother arc, better start. Here I'm trying a 332 7018. Started at 100 amps. Ended up turning it to about 110. And then I blew the breaker. Right there. Here I'm trying a 1/8 inch 7014 actually. I started that at 105, turned it up to 110. Ended up turning it up to about 115. It was a little bit cold, but ran okay. Now here we're doing the AHP, and that goes all the way up to 152 on that readout on the same outlet, which is interesting. Quite a lot of output. Starting off once again 332 6011. I started this one at 65, and it was actually pretty hot, much hotter than the other machines. Turned it down to about 56. That was a little cold. Settled on about 60, and that ran pretty well. Tried a 332 7018 after that. Started that on 75. Turned it up to 80. Ran a little bit better. These 332 rods are great if you don't have quite the amperage you need to run a 1/8. Sticking a little bit there, but I prefer 332 in a lot of circumstances actually. Trying out a 1/8 7014 again. Started that at about 96, turned that up, settle on about 115, blew the breaker once again. Was welding on AC in that last clip before, the breaker blew again. But what I found kind of interesting was that the AC frequency, you can actually adjust it on stick welding. And here I started off at 200 hertz. It's a little sped up, but you can hear the difference. And this is down all the way to 40. And then right here is about right in the middle, about 120. Just thought that was kind of cool. Not really sure what sort of applications there are for adjusting the frequency, but it's kind of interesting. Those were 7018s, 332, and here's the actual bumper. I kind of liked how they ran with that, so I left it on about 120 frequency, about 80 amps, and just taking some passes here on the bumper. Ran pretty well. Those outside corner joints like that take a little less heat than just going on plate like that test piece, but ran pretty well. And these are 7018s. They weren't dried out at all. I finally got a toaster oven actually that'll fit a 7018 lengthwise, so I'll probably try and throw some of those in because I was getting a little bit of porosity, especially on the starts. The starts is really where you're going to get some porosity a lot of times, so just thought that was pretty cool with the frequency thing. Decided to mess around with it a little bit. Those 7018s like to glass over with the flux, so that's why I'm rubbing it on the concrete there, trying to knock some of that off before I strike the arc again. Not bad though, you can do some good stuff with those 332s. So what can we take away from all of this? Well, first I'll say, seems like 115 kind of is just a limitation in itself. It's never going to be ideal. If you're welding on thicker metal, you're just going to want to have access to 230. But that being said, I was pretty impressed with how much current that AHP would put out on just a wall outlet, up to 150 amps. That's pretty impressive. And it ran those 332 rods, it ran them hot, ran the 1/8 inch ones pretty well even, so I was quite impressed with that. Of course, the trade-off, it's the biggest, bulkiest machine out of the three, and it did trip the breaker at least twice. It blew it again when I was welding on my own, so again, just going back to using the strongest one you can, maybe that would have helped out a little bit. The Power MIG blew the breaker at least once and performed all right with the 332 rods. The thing that annoyed me about the Power MIG was its max output on 115 was 115 amps, which is, in my mind, it's like just barely borderline. You really, for like an 1/8 inch 7018, you want to have 125 amps at least. So that kind of bugged me about that a little bit. I would have liked to see a little bit more amps out of that and be able to run a nice 1/8 inch 7018. But again, we can't ask the world out of it. You know, it does great on 230 volt, and again, the MIG function works particularly well even on 115. The Everlast, well, I said it when I first mentioned about the machine or whatever. I never liked running it on 115. It just seemed anemic, and that was kind of confirmed today. It had a little bit of trouble running those 6011s and 80 amps. To me, in my mind, that's kind of another one of those borderline amperages where you really want even just 5 or 10 more amps and you would be able to do a little bit more work. But the one thing that I found most interesting was the difference in the performance of the machines at a set amperage. Like that AHP with the 332 6011, 65 amps, it was hot. It burned in there. I had to turn it down. Whereas with the Everlast, 80 amps, hot start, arc force all the way up, wasn't really doing so well. So that difference in the same amperage between the three different machines was pretty interesting to me. And also, I thought it was really cool that on the AHP, you can adjust the frequency when you're stick welding. You could hear the different pitches of the arc when I was welding with that, which I thought was pretty cool. I wonder what sort of applications there are for that. So I'm going to be practicing, messing around with that a little bit and seeing what I can find out about that, because it was pretty cool. It just makes a cool noise. You can turn it all around, you know, make funny noises with it, which is kind of cool. But as far as getting your own machine, my personal favorite out of these three, again, not trying to plug anything, but I think the Power MIG is probably the best all-around option as far as just the versatility and stuff. It did okay with the 332 rods on 115, enough to get something done. And again, the MIG function is great on 115. Again, though, I was pretty impressed with what the AHP will do. So those are just couple thoughts I have on it, just a little bit about the machines I have and the experiences I've had with trying to learn how to stick weld. And pretty interesting stuff, kind of cool. But thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of it. And I'll see you guys for the next one. Y'all take care.